It felt like just yesterday that we were in the Himalayas, metaphorically speaking, and we were on a pilgrimage of sorts to the birthplace of Raj Al Ghul, metaphorically speaking. And it was at about this point that a storm began brewing just above the summit of Annapurna. And it was kind of at that point that I thought to myself, I don't have time for this. It's far more pressing that we discuss the Pilgrim Wines Chenin Blanc 2021 made by winemaker Henry Kotze. Now, Henry is an important figure in South African wine, not least of all because of his pioneering work with unusual cultivars. The trouble is, of course, that all his achievements are painfully at odds with his very quiet, unassuming personality. And so sometimes you don't even know that you're standing in the presence of greatness. Currently, Henry is the cellar master at Mulderbosch in Stellenbosch, where at this point it's worth saying that if you haven't tasted his Mulderbosch single vineyard Cabernet Franc, which recently earned a Platter 5-star award, then you really do need to track that down. But outside of that, he was also the first winemaker in South Africa to bottle and vinify a Bastardo do Castello, or Trusseau, which is a grape from the Viura. After that, he was the first winemaker to bottle and vinify a Viura, or Macabeo, which is a grape from Spain. He was also the first winemaker to bottle and vinify a Vermentino, first under the Ayama label and after that at Morgenster. But it doesn't end there, because before Mulderbosch, and in fact even before Pilgrim Wines, Henry was the cellar master at Morgenster in the Helderberg. And it was here that he was again involved in a pioneering role, developing a range of wines with Italian cultivars. First up, he produced an exemplary Nebbiolo called the Nabucco. He produced a Sangiovese-led Super Tuscan-style blend. And he also, as mentioned earlier, produced a Vermentino. And just in case you start thinking that Henry was some kind of show pony doing parlor tricks on the weird fringes of South African wine, his classics were sublime too. We've already mentioned his 5-star Cabernet Franc at Mulderbosch, but before that, at Morgenster, his Bordeaux-style blends were absolutely impeccable and regularly raked in awards. Not least of all, when his Lawrence River Blend 2014 was awarded the title of Best Bordeaux Blend in South Africa at the 2020 Old Mutual Trophy Wine Show Awards. But let's move from the past to the present and explore the wine of the day. Today's Chenin Blanc is from a region called the VOOR-PAARDEBERG, which is right down on the southern end of the Swartland. This is a little region that has a rich history of pioneering winemakers and farmers. Because it was about 25 years ago that winemakers like Eben Sadie and Adi Badenhorst began working the land. And some might argue this was kind of the birth of the Swartland Revolution. And there were farmers too, like Willy Mostert, who had the vision way back then to begin planting cultivars like Roussanne and Marsanne and Grenache Blanc. And that is why today, 2.5 decades later, these cultivars are producing some incredible wines, not only in their own right, but also as components in some of the region's Chenin Blanc-led white blends. Two off the top of my head to look out for would be Vondeling's Babiana and also Trezane Barnard's The Search white blend. So when we give this guy a sniff, it does possess some fairly classic notes up front. There is this sort of restrained white peach and a hint of salty sea spray, which I think pop up quite often in some of South Africa's better Chenin Blancs. But then there's some other stuff in there as well. There's an intriguing, rather surprising note of tart Granny Smith green apple, and then there is ginger, and there's smoky, savory gun smoke and gravel, and even with a bit of time in the glass, there's a fascinating toffee apple candy element. So let's take a sip and see if that carries through. Well, the peach elements are there, but that tart green Granny Smith apple note is really quite formidable. And it really takes you by surprise, because South African Chenin Blanc is so often in the kind of peach or white peach or apricot zone that when out of the blue you're hit by this laser-like Granny Smith green apple acidity, it really is a big surprise. And what's more, despite this incredibly pronounced green apple acidity, the wine is by no means unbalanced, because it has a beautiful, rich, thick texture that really coats the palate. So this combination of green apple and the apricot and white peach elements manage to be incredibly vivid and concentrated without ever being sweet. And more on the topic of texture, as the wine evolves on your palate, there's a sort of citrus pith thing that begins emerging towards the finish. And so on the tail, you have a sort of culmination of this vivid green apple acidity with the restrained white peach and then the citrus pith. And what's more, that ginger spice that we smelt on the nose pops up, and there's even a bit of quince, which you didn't expect. It really is a fascinating wine. Now, when we were describing the wine, we spent a lot of time talking about texture and concentration, and there's two reasons for this. The first one is that the grapes for this wine were taken from vines in the VOOR-PAARDEBERG that are 36 years old. This makes them old enough to technically be a certified heritage vineyard or an old vine wine. The second reason is that while you wouldn't have immediately guessed it, 50% of the juice in this wine was fermented on the skins. This skin contact component is not only responsible for adding those moody, savory gunsmoke and ginger spice notes, but it also brings that rich texture to the palate as some of the tannins from the grape skins make it into the final wine. And perhaps one final question about the wine that is worth answering is, how does that incredible, vivid green Granny Smith apple acidity get into the wine? If we take a look at the ABV, we see that it's only 12.5%. The reason for this is because Henry harvested the fruit a little earlier than many others would have in the same region. And the end result is not only that amazing tart acidity, but also that delightfully elusive, restrained character that the fruit takes on. All in all, a delightfully intricate take on South African Chenin Blanc. So that's all we have time for today, but if you enjoyed the video, then support us on Patreon and subscribe to the HanDrinksSolo YouTube channel, where we publish 6 videos every single month talking about wine history, wine science, unusual cultivars, and some of the dynamic winemaking stars coming out of the South African winelands.